Good morning, everyone, and welcome along to our Strategic Dairy Farm webinar today. I'd like to thank William Baillie for hosting us again. I am Sophie Brewster. I work for AHDB covering Scotland as a Knowledge Exchange Manager. I would like to start with a little bit of housekeeping today. If we could understand that everyone will be muted, there's quite a few of you on the call. If you want to ask a question, open up the tab on the right hand side of your screen and click on the chat function, type in what you want to ask and send it in. Also, if you're collecting Dairy Pro points, please put in your name, email and postcode and we will get you signed up for that as well. Please ask questions throughout and we hope you enjoy the webinar today. On to today, we will be looking at genomics in action. We're very great to have Marco Winters and David Guthrie. Marco is the head of genomics for AHDB and David works for Genus, advising and helping people make the right breeding choices. And what we will do today, we will start up with an update from Hillhead. So Willie will give us a bit of a run through what's been happening since we last saw him, and hopefully all's been good and exciting on the farm. We will also then hear from Marco. Marco will run through quite a bit of background on genomics, the importance of it and how to get the best out of the genetics within your herd. We'll also have a bit of a review of the genetics across Hillhead's cows. Then we'll hand over to David and he will introduce us to the way he's been working with Hillhead, with Genus ABS, how the genomics help and how they see a future with them. By the end of today, I hope everyone will have a better understanding of genomic testing, hopefully answer some questions that you may have, and also the benefits of using it if it's right for you and what the commercial viability is for it on your farm. So I will stop sharing my screen now and hopefully we will be able to hear from William. Good morning, William.
Good morning. Right, just a quick update here on what's been happening at Hillhead since our last meeting. In general, the cows have been milking fairly well. We'll have been averaging between 35 and 36 litres most of the winter, and our milk quality has been, I've been pretty pleased with it. We're running about 4.3% fat and 3.4 protein. The cows have been calving away, we're calving all the time, and we've been getting very few calving problems or post-calving issues. We have been getting a lot of beef calves lately, which has been is rather nice when the price for these calves is as good. Having a good few beef calves to sell, and we peaked up at 450 for a 4-week-old calf last week. The high feed prices haven't had too big an impact on us as of yet, as most of our feed for this winter was all purchased forward, but that's now coming to an end as we have very little bought after April. So I'm predicting that's going to put about 0.8 of a penny onto just straight onto our feed costs with the rise in the feed price. We've got our in calf heifers are now turned out, and we started zero grazing grass both last week. We thought earlier in the year that we would be starting much earlier than this because we thought it was going to be an early spring, but about 3 weeks ago we had quite a sharp spell of frost and we had a week of quite hard frost at night, and we were down to length of -8 at the beginning of April. So that really slowed down the grass growth, but hopefully things are going to pick up now. We could do with a bit more heat still, right enough. We have been a little bit short-staffed over the last few months, as one of our staff members, a Romanian guy, never returned after going home for Christmas. This was really because of the COVID rules, couldn't get flights, and then the having to isolate in a hotel didn't really appeal to him. But I must say all the current staff, both full and part-time, have really stepped up to the mark, and really pleased with how everybody's doing some extra shifts, and we've managed to get through not too bad. And we have got a new member joining the team as of next Monday, so hopefully that will ease things off for everybody. On the other side of our business, we've got our milk vending machine started now. We've got 2 machines up and running in the middle of February, and this has been going really well. We've been averaging 400 litres a day through this, but it is a lot more work than we had been expecting. Everybody warned us it would be, and we thought, well, we'll be right enough, but no, it's certainly been a lot of work. And on top of the short-staffed issue, the brunt of that's probably landed in Jennifer, but we've a couple of part-time people started in that now as well, helping us out. So hopefully we're getting past the worst of that. On the last couple of meetings we had, we'll just give a wee we had the one before last was the review on the mastitis with James Breen again, and we're still seeing improvements in the mastitis yet, and we're now down to an average of 13 cases per 100 cows over the last 12 months, and our cell count is rolling at 87. So really pleased with how the mastitis went, and we've seen a lot from that meeting. And our last meeting with Jimmy Goldie, kind of review of the feeding. The one main change we've made since then is the heifers are now up to 8 months now. The heifers are on hay and concentrates, and the heifers, I would say, look as if they're doing a lot better. But to be honest, us being short-staffed and things, we haven't actually had them weighed since we changed. But hopefully we'll get that done next week, as we're hoping to turn a lot of the younger animals out next week when the grass growth takes up. So that's a bit of a review of what we've been up to here in the last few months. I'll just hand you back to you, Sophie.
Thank you very much, Rob. Thank you for that. I'm going to hand over now to Marco. Marco, good morning. I will. There we go. Thank you, Marco. Please ask questions throughout, everyone.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. So yeah, we'll, as was introduced, we'll give you a bit of an update, first of all, in terms of general breeding and where we're at, and then we move on to herd-specific stuff, and David will give an update on where we're heading in terms of bull selection. So Sophie, if you just want to go on. So the first thing, probably before we really dive into, well, because I think very often when we talk about breeding, the questions come up, well, which bulls should I be buying, or which cows should I be breeding from? And I think really before you even get into that kind of detailed thinking of your bull selection, it's really important you make time to think about your breeding goals going forward, because setting your breeding goals, knowing the direction of where you want to go to, ultimately determines where you end up. But it also makes the life of trying to pick the bulls and the cows you're going to work with a lot easier. So when it comes to that, you really have to think about benchmarking your herd strength and weaknesses, and really use actual data for that. It's too easy to think you've got a certain problem because something cropped up this week or last week that all of a sudden is requiring attention. But in the long run, having actual data, monitoring where your herd's going is really useful. And I'll talk about the herd genetic report as an example of how that can really help you to pick out your herd's strengths and weaknesses on genetics. I would also advise you to talk to others who are not directly on your farm day to day, so talk to your vets and consultants. And the reason for that being that if you're so close to your own herd on a daily basis, it sometimes isn't that easy to pick up strengths and weaknesses because you're so used to what's going on. So do make advice from the people who also know your herds and may give advice on what they think are maybe areas you should work on. Also, talking to your milk buyer is useful. I know it's not easy to predict where the milk market is going, but just understanding even where they really want to go to is an important one. And obviously think about where you want to be 5 or 10 years from now, and that's breeding is a long-term goal, so it's not what you want to do next week, it's really a long-term decision. Then the next slide really is just a reminder to say that whenever it comes to performance on farm, it is a combination of genetics and management of these animals. And genetics, whenever we talk about performance, can really focus on not just production traits, but a lot of new traits nowadays. And in particular, health and fertility are traits that we've been focusing on quite significantly in the UK, and are areas that as part of your breeding objective, you really have to think about. It's not just about where does my milk contract need me to be in terms of milk, fat, or protein. It's really thinking about the whole cow and everything that affects that performance. So we do have a lot of traits now that we can select on. That really does make it, well, in some respects, a lot easier, because you can really tailor make the type of bull you want to work with or the type of cow you want to work with. But for some, it can also be daunting because there is quite a lot of data there to go through. And to help you, just as a reminder again, we provide these financial indexes that are really there to help you narrow down the data and to help that selection decision that you're going to make. Because what these indexes do is really bring the good bulls to the top that are good on the whole host of traits that we're interested in, not just one particular trait. So a quick reminder that the PLI, or Profitable Lifetime Index, is set up as a profit index for all your round calving herds. It's a within breed index and can really help you to pick bulls that are suitable for well, for, as I said, an all-year-round calving system. We've then got our SCI, which is specifically geared towards our spring block calving herds, and ACI, which is geared towards autumn block calving herds. And all of these are slightly different in terms of particular fertility, how they address it, whereas where in the block calving system we pay more attention. And maintenance is the other one, where we want a smaller cow in the spring block calving versus an all-year-round calving system. The graph that you see on the right-hand side there is just to illustrate the traits that go into it. This is summarized, so if you look at the production part of it, so about a third of our overall index today is production driven, but it incorporates milk, fat and protein. Similarly, survival incorporates lifespan of the milking cow and the calf. And so we've got a number of traits really that go into these indexes. But the main thing for you to be aware of that we do put these indexes together as an economic optimum to say, oh, what really are the traits that we need to make profits in these types of farming systems. Over to the next slide, Sophie. Okay, so what we've also introduced for the April release, so the release we just had earlier this month, is a new index called our Healthy Cow Subindex. It's as the name already says, it's an index that's been put together really to address the health, fertility and longevity of the cow, and we put it in a financial figure that represents each bull's financial savings that it will pass on to the daughter. Click again, please. And again. So the pie chart there is really illustrating the percentages of weightings that we've got within those. So we incorporate lifespan and calf survival. We've got fertility, which includes non-return and calving interval, somatic cell count, mastitis, functional type traits, so that's foot and leg and memory traits, lameness advantage as a direct trait to tackle lameness on farm, and then direct maternal calving ease. So it incorporates all of the health traits that we believe really will contribute to a more profitable and more healthy herds to work with. And then the trend graph that's showing there is to illustrate that the trend that we have been seeing since the late 90s or early 2000s has already been an improving trend. And that is because we have really majored on the selection for these traits. So although we saw a decline in the 90s when a lot of the selection was on production traits, since then, the PLI has changed and the selection emphasis in the UK has already had a significant change, and that's resulted in cows improving. But hopefully introducing this index as a standalone index will help you just to highlight, well, which bulls really do give me the health that I require in my herd. Okay. So this slide has got 4 separate graphs on, and what it's still trying to illustrate is the performance of our top performing bull, our quartile 1 bulls versus the lower performing bulls, quartile 4, for the healthy cow index. And the first graph there shows the lameness incidence throughout lactations 1 to 5. And as you would hope, and also has come through when we look at the figures, is that the bulls that rank really well in healthy cow have got a lower lameness incidence than the bulls that rank poorly on healthy cow. Similarly, for mastitis incidence, we see again that the bulls who rank really well on healthy cow will have a lower incidence of mastitis versus the ones that rank really poorly on healthy cow index. But also you can see that in the first lactation, some of that genetics isn't really coming through yet. But as cows get older, genetics really can have an impact on mastitis, and using healthy cow or the mastitis index directly will help you. Then looking at fertility, again, our top ranking bulls have got a better fertility, so lower calving intervals than our worst ranking healthy cow bulls. And then the final one is looking at lifespan, and that graph illustrates, once it comes up, that our higher ranking healthy cow bulls have a longer lifespan in the daughters than the other one. So it's an overarching index that will tackle a whole host of traits and hopefully will help you to steer again through all the different numbers that are out there. But it's a one number that can highlight which bulls can really give you the health, fertility and longevity that you probably need. Okay, Sophie, next one. So the other thing, just to remind you when it comes to breeding is, well, ultimately we want you to be in control over your purchase decisions. And it is important that you make that purchase and don't just rely on the semen rep or your breeding advisor to sell you the semen. It's too often to just hand it over to well, the experts in the field but it is really important that you think about what it is that you need, and getting the right semen in the tank, as I said there, is critical, because those sires are going to be the sires of your next generation, but also they're going to be the dams who provide you the offspring for the generation after. So making breeding decisions is very, very important, and make sure you take time to think about it. Also consider how many replacements you need to have. So how much beef can you use to maximize your potential from revenue versus dairy. And again, on the dairy side, you should also consider using sex versus conventional. And nowadays, about 53% of semen sales last year was sexed. We believe that this year that's significantly higher again. So we do really see a move towards a much higher uses of sex semen across the herd to really minimize the dairy bull calf and maximize revenue potential on using beef. Then, well, consider which cows you're going to breed from. So think about the bulls you're going to use, but also think about which cows you're going to mate to dairy semen. And the herd genetic report I'll talk you through in a bit can really help you to highlight which of the females have got the best genetic potential and to breed from. And again, genomic information will help you to fine tune the information that is out there.
Marco, before we move on to genomics, can you hear me all right?
Sorry, can you repeat that again? I can't hear you well.
How do you determine the relative weightings within PLI and other indices?
Okay, so that pie chart that I showed you earlier and the weightings that we put in there, it's constructed by, well, first of all, as an economic model. So we model a typical UK dairy herd with typical feed costs, replacement costs, milk prices. And based on that, the model will come up with the best index based on what the trends are. Then it gets discussed with industry. So we've got a genetics advisory forum, which has got a mixture of AI companies, breed societies, also milk buyers, RSPCA sits on native vets, but also importantly farmers. And with that group, we go through the modeling and well, see whether we believe that is the right direction for the industry. And we tweak it a little bit. There's not really a massive change because ultimately the economic model is really guiding us what it should be. So it is steered by science and then sense checked by, well, farmers who look at it and industry representatives. So it's not just a group of people who sit around the table and we randomly decide what that number is. It is a scientific way of doing it. And we review it on a yearly basis with our genetics advisory forum. And if we believe it requires updates, then we'll do so. So the process is the same for PLI, SCI, and ACI.
Thank you very much, Marco.
Okay. So you're going to go to the next slide. So just 2 slides on genomics before I hand back to Willie, just to give an update on his breeding policy. This is really there just to give you a reminder for those of you who are less familiar with genomics, what it is that we do. So ultimately, what we do with genomic evaluations is, like I said there, we predicted genetic merit from the DNA. So whereas traditionally we've looked at the performance of animals and then, or looked at the pedigree and tried to decide how good animals are, we still use that information, but on top of it, we also now look at the DNA of the animal. So we take the DNA, we do a genomic test on it, and we then use 80,000 markers on the chromosome to predict which segment of the DNA is good for fertility or which segment of the DNA is good for production traits, etc. And based on those 80,000 markers, we can have a prediction on the breeding potential of those animals and ultimately also the performance potential of those animals. And what it really allows us to do is increase the reliability of our genetic indexes. Having an earlier reliable prediction of genetic indexes also then allows us to work with younger animals. And because of genetic progress, really that ability to focus on the younger generation, which are genetically superior, at a higher reliability through genomics is really accelerating genetics in the UK. And we can see that in the bulls that are being used, but we can also see that in the female trends that we are probably making twice as much genetic progress today as we used to do prior to the introduction of genomics in 2012. The next slide, well, illustrates how that data is being used. You can click on one more. Okay, so we try to unlock that DNA information by translating that DNA, the genotype profile, into something useful that we can apply in the younger generation. And the way we do that is by using well-proven sires. We've currently got about 40,000 sires where we know exactly how the daughters have performed. Then we look also at their DNA, and by comparing the two, we can come up with this this key that unlocks that information that's stored within the DNA. And then when you then take a hair sample on a young calf, we map that against that reference population. So what have we learned from the past, and therefore what can we predict this new calf to do? The way we do the test is the same for bulls that are going into AI. So when you open your bull catalogs and see your genomic test, that information and the accuracy of that prediction is exactly the same as if you do a female calf on farm. We use the same modeling, we use the same prediction, and therefore the reliability on females is exactly the same as on the male side. So that's where I just want to stop with a general introduction, and maybe now hand it over back to you, Willie, just to give an update on your breeding policy.
Thank you, Marco. Right, our breeding policy here at Hillhead, for I think it must be 4 or 5 years now, we've been using Genus and our GMS mating program. One of the main reasons we went on to this was we felt we had quite an issue with inbreeding, and we felt that the computer mating would help with that. I have been very well pleased with the offspring that's come through from this program. I feel the cows are a lot more even and well balanced, and there's less extremes within it. And probably for about 3 or 4 years now as well, we are all using nothing but genomic tested bulls. Just been really impressed with how these bulls have come out saying they're doing what they say they're going to do, and the increase in the genetic merit of these bulls is so much far ahead of the proven sires. We also now for 2 years we've been using nothing but sex semen and sex dairy semen and beef semen. So we select the top third of the cows, and these go to sex semen, and then the maiden heifers are all done with sex semen, and then everything else goes to beef. And also any cow after we get to 125 days in milk, they go to beef regardless of who they are, because when we get to that stage, our main priority is just to get them in calf. And we're feeling that this policy is breeding us ample amount of heifers, probably still slightly more than we need. We have been increasing the herd, but we've probably still got 1 or 2 more coming on now as we're actually needing, so we could maybe actually up the beef slightly. But having this does give us a lot of beef calves and very few black and white bull calves. And as I say, over the last year or so, these bull calves have been these beef calves have been a fantastic trade. So it really does make quite a difference to the bottom line. So on to selecting the bulls we're using, we're really heavily focused in PLI, and we have over the last few years we've been a big focus on milk solids, as this is an area we probably felt in the past we had neglected, as when we were on a liquid milk contract, there was little incentive to produce more milk solids. But I felt a couple of years ago that the industry was changing and that we really should try and get onto this. And actually, as of 1st of May this year, we'll be moving from a liquid contract onto a milk solids contract. So really in the last 12 months, we've really put a lot more, really pushing the emphasis on this milk solids, but also trying to pay quite a bit of attention to the management traits, as we feel that these are very important. Try to get the fertility and the lifespan and the cell count and all those things, I think have a big impact as well. So our focus is really driven now on the last year on milk solids, and actually to the extent that we have been crossing some of the cows that have got poorer milk solids. We've actually bred some of them to the Jersey to try and really increase this. We went with this decision as we've actually had been trialling. We had a group of Jersey cross Holstein heifers, which we milked for the last year. They're second calvers now. They arrived from a result of using a Holstein bull as a sweeper on our block calving Jersey herd on the other farm, and I was very impressed with how these heifers did, both with the amount of milk they gave, the quality was very good, and their fertility was also very good. So that's why we decided we're going to try and breed a few more of these, and hoping that the ones we breed from higher PLI cows and doing them with proven Jersey bulls should breed even better heifers than the ones that were just used as we're using a random sweeper bull. So, you know, very focused on milk solids now, and also the health and fertility traits. So that's really sums up where our breeding is at the moment.
Thank you. I think that really is, well, useful information also when we go through the figures to see where is the herd moving from what we can see in the herd genetic report. So thank you for that. Sophia, you bring the slides back up again.
There we go, Marco. Thank you.
Okay. So before we go into the exact herd details, because genomic testing is being used on the farm, and because we're also going to focus on that in this meeting, I just thought it may be useful just to give you a bit of an overview where we in the UK are seeing the uptake of genomic testing for females. And so this graph, there's quite a lot of numbers there and a lot of information, but ultimately, hopefully what you can see is that from the graph, the uptake of genomic testing is increasing. So that graph is representing the uptake by year of birth. And because not all animals are genotyped immediately at birth, there's a bit of a time lag. And certainly in 2020 and 2021, we expect that numbers to be higher again than we saw in 2019. But year on year, we're seeing an increase. Last year, or over the last 12 months, we are close to 36,000 Holsteins being genotyped, but also the other breeds are making use of genomic testing to also advance their breeds. Last year, our estimate is that around about 20% of milk recorded herds did some form of genomic testing. Not all of them will have gone as heavily into it as maybe this farm has, but certainly we're seeing more and more farmers trying to utilize the information to improve the herd, and we expect that number to continue to increase. When we look at the sire side, about 70% of semen that is used today is from genomic young sires. That number is leveling off. It's been increasing quite rapidly since the introduction in 2012, but now we are seeing a leveling off at around about 70% of all semen being sold from young sires. Next slide. Then also, so on this farm, we talk about genomic testing, but I thought it is worthwhile just to let you know, obviously, there's a lot of providers out there in the industry who do genomic testing, and I've put the logos of some of these on there. But the main thing for you to really be aware of that AHDB does sit in the middle of them. So whoever you choose to do your genomic testing, ultimately all of them will provide that genotype to us. We then do the evaluation and provide a PLI back to these, and that PLI includes the production traits, the health traits, but also the type traits that then come back to you as a genomic evaluation. And it is important that you use UK information, because ultimately these predictions are made on UK circumstances, UK genetic reference bases, and therefore give you a much better prediction than somebody who would try and sell you a foreign index or a proprietary index that be calibrated just on in-house conditions. So yeah, be aware that well, the AHDB levy is part of this function and provides these services in the background for all of them. Okay. So when it comes to genomics, again, we talk a lot about the advances in genetic gains that you're going to get just through breeding, but there's a lot more that you can get from genomics. Obviously, screening of young stock. First of all, parentage validation and discovery. So we, as part of the service, check whether the sire and dam is valid. If we have got a genotype on the sire and the dam, and pretty much for the majority of animals, the sire will be there. If we can't, if the parent is turning out to be incorrect, we then do a discovery, and in the majority of cases, we can tell you which is the actual sire that resulted in that calf. So we correct parentage as it's coming through. You can also test for known genetic recessives to help you fine-tune your breeding program. Well, and then once you've got that information, you can really use it to pre-select animals for rearing. So if you've got a surplus of heifers, there is an ability to cull some of the poorer ones out and save yourself the 1,800 pounds that it costs roughly to rear a heifer to milking stage. So early selection decisions can already pay back some of the upfront costs that you've got to do for genomic testing. And then it can really help you to breed from your better animals. So identify your elite females, breed them to sexed, and identify the bottom end of the herd to really maximize the revenue you're going to get from beef semen usage. Ultimately, it does mean you're in control of your herd and you can plan for the future. And because the genetics is the foundation you're going to be working from, taking time to think about it, taking time to maximize the potential of your herd going forward is very well time invested in the planning for the future.
Marco, we've got a couple of questions for Willie, just from your on your breeding selection. I think Doreen's going to ask them because my volume isn't very good.
Yeah, Willie, can you bring yourself back up onto the screen? We've got a couple of questions for you. The first one is, how do you choose your top cows?
The main selection criteria is on the PLI, and I do have also a bit of visual on, there's some cows that maybe come up that I'll decide not to breed to dairy, that there's for some reason I maybe don't like them, but no, it's mainly PLI.
Okay, thank you. And the other question is, what type traits do you consider?
In the past, we spent a lot of focus on type traits, but we don't really look at them overly much now. When I'm selecting bulls, we're more focusing on PLI and the milk solids and the health and fitness traits. We will look at some, but I look at that less. I probably leave a bit more of that to the mating program, because I think it's something you maybe were getting too sore hung up in the past. I don't think there's as much variation in bulls out there now as there used to be, and you can't use a bull that's maybe a wee bit weaker in a trait if it's only going on to cows which are strong in that trait, and you can then maybe get other advantages. So I do look at type traits a little, but it's not something I get overly hung up on.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much. That's all for now.
Okay, thank you. So the next slide is, well, again, an overview of the herd and the results that came through from genomic testing, where we compare traditional pedigree index, so that's based on half sire, half dam, which we know only if there's no genomic information, versus the PLI that we found once we do a genomic test on that heifer. So on the bottom axis, you can see there the pedigree indexes, and then on the axis going up, you've got the genomic indexes. What I've done there is highlighted the animals that ranked in the top quartile on the pedigree index in gray dots, and also highlighted the animals that ranked in the bottom quartile, which are the orange dots, and then the blue ones in the middle are our 50 percentile. And really the bit that I wanted to highlight there, which is not extremely visible in this slide, but also when you then look at the top quartile and the bottom quartile after genomic testing, so those are the green and red lines that run through the chart. The two animals that well, maybe just to focus on there at the bottom of our top quartile, there's two gray dots that originally, when we looked at the pedigree index, around about 550 PLI pedigree index, after genomic testing, they came out as 400 points PLI. So animals that on pedigree index, we thought were going to be in a top quarter, but once we did the genomic test, we actually found that they ended up being in the bottom quartile of the herd. So if we just blindly made the mating decision on pedigree index and put the top quartile, let's say, to sex semen, what we would actually have done is breed two animals to sexed that we probably should have bred to beef, because they're not genetically superior. So just using that genomic information can really help us to identify, well, individuals within a group that can be selected for sexed or deselected because they're no longer good enough. Some of this change you see here is not just because genomic information is more important, but also I highlighted earlier, we do know that a proportion of calves are misidentified at birth. In this herd, there aren't too many, but on average on a UK scale, we probably estimate 10% of calves are misidentified, and that can really move animals up or down. So obviously, if you assign the wrong parents to a calf, you think it may have really good parents, but once we've corrected the pedigree, it can really be quite disappointing. So genomics can really help us to fine tune and select animals that are the true elite or the true bottom quartile. Okay, next slide.
Marco, we've got a question on genomic testing cross Jersey crosses. Can you just answer that?
Sorry, did you say whether crossbreds?
Crossbreds, yeah.
Okay, so yeah, so at the moment our genomic evaluations are only done on purebred animals, and our advice is to at least have 2 generations of purebreds, so 75% pure, and we can provide a genomic test. We are working on a crossbreed genomic testing, but currently we don't feel comfortable enough just to put that information out there. So the US does provide it. They do a bit of a blend. What they do is they run the genomic evaluations through a Holstein key and a Jersey key, if it's a Holstein Jersey cross, and then blend that information given the genomic background of that calf. That's something we could do because we do run genomic evaluations for Jerseys as well as Holstein, but we're currently still researching what the best way of providing that information is. We know there's an interest, and so there are some projects ongoing also at SIUC who are our partners in this. But currently crossbreds we don't recommend for genotyping.
Thank you very much, Marco.
Okay, so this slide again is based on this herd, which is looking at the first crop of calves that were genotyped, and then looking at the performance that are now coming through in the first lactation. So 54 heifers were genomically tested as calves, are now milking in the first lactation. And the data we've got on these are still quite early. Some have completed the lactations up to 10 tests, but some have only just recently started. So we got 3 milk recordings to work with. Average of this group of heifers is 167 days in milk. But what is already clear once we look at the data is that when we look at the genomics, when it comes to the predictions for either milk, fat percent or protein percent, there's a strong correlation that highlights that the animals that we predicted to be good on their genomics also are now performing well within the herd. So there is, as I showed you at one of the earlier slides, obviously performance is the combination of genetics and management. So we're never going to expect a perfect line because there will always be some variation due to management around that line. But what it does show is that our genetic elite animals are also the ones who are going to be performing better. It's very clear when we look at fat and protein percent that if as a herd you do want to make gains and you are selecting on improved fat and protein percent, genomics can really help you to identify those animals that are going to do that for you. Now, somatic cell count are also included on that graph there. It's first lactation animals, we typically don't have a lot of somatic cell count problems, and as Willie said, this herd is very low in somatic cell count in any case. But already, as you hopefully can see, there's already a bit of a trend line showing that animals that are predicted to be worse for somatic cell count, which would be at the higher end of the somatic cell count scale, also on average were the ones are currently the ones milking well, with the highest somatic cell count levels versus the bulls or versus the heifers that have got a low negative somatic cell count prediction. There's one heifer out there that really stands out, and that probably is some environmental effect that really pushed that animal up on somatic cell count. But on average, we can already see that genetics is coming through, and we would expect that to be more visible once you get into second, third, fourth lactations, where genetics and somatic cell count have got a much stronger relationship. Okay, next slide. So now looking specifically at the herds and the information that we see coming through from this farm, well, what we can first of all see when we look at the herd genetic report summary, this is looking at animals, the young stock at the top there, and then the milking animals first to 5th plus lactation at the bottom of the chart. What we'd like to see is that the genetic merit of our young animals are superior to the milking herd, and in this herd it's clear. When you look at PLI, for example, that's the herd is making good progress from quite low in the milking herd, of the very old milking herd, to a very good level at the 0 to 12 months age group. And we see that pretty much across the board. Milk production has improved, or milk kilograms, fat and protein kilograms have improved. We've seen quite a strong improving picture on fat and protein percent, as Willie also highlighted as a key focus for the herd. Lifespan is improving. Somatic cell count is also improving. Remember, we want to see negative figures for somatic cell count. Fertility is an improving picture, mastitis is, and also maintenance we're managing to keep at a good level. Because for maintenance, really we'd like to see it as low as possible, because higher numbers means bigger animals requiring higher maintenance feed costs, and therefore ultimately will increase your feed bill. So look out for bulls that are low or negative on maintenance as an ideal candidate. Then the next slide is then starting to benchmark this, because sometimes just looking at the data on its own makes it difficult to determine, well, how does that compare to the national herd? So as part of the herd genetic report that we provide, we also give a benchmark statistic. First of all, now looking at the milking herds, those blocks that are highlighted there in yellow-orange are this particular herd, where it sits compared to the national milk recorded herd. So for PLI, the herd sits in the top 15%, which is really good. Ranks really well for kilograms milk, fat and protein. Also is highlighted on fat and protein percent, which hasn't been a major focus in the past. It doesn't rank so well. And then where, well, somatic cell count lifespan again is ranking well. Probably from this, I would say, well, watch out for making sure that fertility continues to improve. Top 40% is good, it's better than national average. But given where the herd is and where it could aim for with genomic testing, I think that can be pushed up further. Similarly, for maintenance, we've seen a good improvement or a good level there. But again, there's probably still room for improvements to work on. And well, as already discussed, components is an area certainly to protect. And then the other one that also was mentioned is inbreeding. So we'd like to see it as low as possible. And currently we roughly recommend 6.5% as a criteria. So it is moving up towards the top end, and that's where mating programs can really help you to manage that. I wouldn't be overly concerned where it sits at the moment. It's not a reason to go crossbreeding because it sits at that level. It's a very acceptable level, but it's just something to be aware of. And when it comes to making a mating plan, you can consider using mating programs to help you manage it. Then the next one is looking at the benchmarking for the young stock. So it's looking at the younger generation. Well, good progress is being made on milk and fat in particular. PLI still ranks really well in the top 15% of the national herd. Other traits are doing well, but I think it's important to maintain that selection pressure on those traits. And as we highlighted already, fertility and maintenance probably would be traits that I would want to keep an eye on in bull selection to make sure that we continue to make progress. And also mastitis index, somatic cell count is going in the right direction. And mastitis, when we looked at the herd trend, is also moving in the right direction. But again, would be an area that when it comes to choice of bulls that you would want to keep an eye on. Okay. Looking then quickly at the last 12 months of bulls that are being, or 12 months worth of calves that are coming through, and which bulls had bred those. So again, as part of our reports, we can also look at the herds, the bulls that are being used in the herd, and where it helps is just to have every now and then a reminder of what were the bulls that I used previously really the right choice for my breeding goals. So here we can, well, I've highlighted a couple of bulls there with some areas that in hindsight may not have been the best choice. So there's one bull there that's a little bit lower on fat percent. Well, given the direction that we're going, probably a bull, despite well, very good all-round traits around it, maybe in terms of fat percent isn't the ideal candidate for this herd. And then a couple of bulls who are well, marginal when it comes to fertility index. And again, when we have got a herd where we really want to major on improving fertility, there may be other bulls out there that in hindsight we should have picked over these three. And that's it, I think, before we move on to David. Yeah. So I'll stop presenting it. I'll come back at the end, but David, over to you for the next couple of slides.
Perfect. Morning, David.
Perfect, thanks. Hi everyone. So I work in the genetic services department at Genus. So I work alongside the breeding advisor and William to try and implement the best genetic progress that we can do on an on-farm level. So I'm just going to talk a wee bit about how the changes to the breeding values for the animals, how that implemented and how that affected the mating program. So the Genus mating program is the genetic management systems, that's GMS. And what it does is it uses all the available data to build a picture of what the genetics are within that animal. So that includes pedigree data, any performance data from the milking herd, and any phenotypic data that's there. And what we then do is build the picture of that animal, and then we design the mating program for what is the specific breeding goals for each individual customer. So a bit like what Willie said earlier, it's for him it's looking at fat and protein and trying to drive that. When we originally started up, it was looking at more towards the conformation of the animal, but as he's become more happier and the level has become more uniform, we've sort of switched the emphasis over to be more in line with the production and the health traits, because we're happy with the level that the conformation is at. But the key really within the mating program is it's that picture of the animal's genetics, because that's what it uses to mate that animal to its ideal mate within the group of available bulls. But if you just click on, so all that changes when genomic results are available, because the genomic data takes full precedence over all the other data, because we know that it's more reliable. It's give or take sort of double the reliability of parent average. We get a much more accurate representation of the animal's genetics because of that, which in turn leads to different and more accurate matings. It also provides a sort of haplotype data, and a bit like what Willie said, is really protecting for that inbreeding, which we're trying to balance between making the correct genetic progress and also balancing and making sure we maintain the inbreeding level. But what happened on this farm with the original 79 animals that were mated, we mated them based on parent average, and then we mated them using the genomic results. And when we analysed the data that came back, there was 48 of them had a different first choice mating. At this time, there was only 4 bulls available for those animals, so there's a really restricted gene pool there. And I think that's why William wanted me to speak about this. It was really amazing the amount of differences that added in. Hopefully over the next couple of slides we'll be able to explain a wee bit of why those differences came from. But as you can see there in the graph at the bottom, it's relatively similar to the one that Marco had. So it's these animals are based on PLI and parent average along the horizontal axis, and then the genomic test there. And this is just looking at if there was a 50% beef breed to beef ratio. So just as an example, you would see that 10% of the animals would move either way. So the animals in the bottom right hand side of the box, they were like Marco said, they were expected to be really good for PLI, and they would have been bred for dairy. But once they got the genomic results, they actually turned out to be in the bottom half of the group. So they would then change to beef. And then similarly with the animals in the top left-hand side, they were expected to be in the poorer 50%, and they moved up to get a dairy mating based on their genomic results. And it's those areas where the genomic test really works, and it's those where you make better genetic progress and where you really make a return on the investment in the genomic test. That is a very low number for the number of different reports that we've done with a lot of customers that are genomic testing. You'd normally see that in a sort of 15% or maybe even up into 20% of the animals that would move. So with him being at 10% is a low number, and that's a great credit to William, and because of, if you just click on, a lot of those changes come from sire ID. So you could just move, yeah, thanks. So a lot of the major changes come from parentage correction. So like Marco said, is that if we had anticipated that the animal was off of X bull, but it's actually off of Y bull, and that completely changes the picture that the mating program produces, and the parent average of what the PLI of that animal is completely changes because of getting that data correct. Some of the other reasons why that could be the case is that So every animal gets 50% of their genes from the dam and 50% of the genes from the sire, and that's how the programme and how parent average is calculated on that ethos. But the reality is you don't necessarily get 50% of the genes from the maternal grandsire and 50% of the genes from the maternal granddam. So as you can see in the diagram on the right, those are represented by maybe the purple and the green box, for example, the 50-50, but the reality is that that calf might get a different portion of the genes from that half of the parent's genes. And that's where the genomic test really comes into its own and identifies that and really makes it a lot easier to figure that out accurately. But I think that if you just click on to the next slide, it's the next slide that's really made me fully grasp how those changes are incorporated. So we didn't have any twins that we genomically tested at Williams, but these are examples of other twins that we've tested on other farms that we work with. So these are two sets of real life twins, and they're obviously two different eggs. They're not split eggs. They're not. The figures would be fairly identical if that was the case. But on a traditional mating program, those two twins would be bred with identical sires, so they would get the exact same mating choices because we would assume that their genetics would be fairly similar. Whereas in reality, you can see that that's definitely not the case. So on the top row, you've got a really huge difference in milk, which in turn leads to a massive difference in fat and protein percent. So especially if these were Williams animals, then we would potentially have mated twin A completely wrongly because he's focusing on fat and protein percent, and we would maybe have assumed that she would have higher. She would maybe be like twin B, maybe she was closer to parent average. So that's really where it changes things. And if you can imagine that as one animal, we would breed that one animal to what we'd expect the parent average to come out at. But the reality is with the genomic test that can be quite a bit different. The same on the bottom half. As you can see there, its stature is on the second to the right. So one of those animals was projected at -1 for stature, and the other one was at +0.6. So that's a huge difference, especially in a trait that's very important to a lot of people at the moment. And then you combine that with the PLI of those twins, over 100 pounds PLI difference. That could easily move one of them above or below the beef cut-off line. And then you'd be making the better decisions off of that animal. So I found that amazing. I think that's really hard to believe that twins could be like that, but it's a great example of why the genomic test makes such a big difference, and how that can then make a huge difference to the genetic progress in your herd. If you just thanks. So a bit of what William said about breeding the top level of animals by PLI, and what we've started to do and trying to implement on farms is really trying to dial down on that and breed those better animals off the back of that. So every dot on this graph is an animal in William's herd. As you can see, they're the filled in circles. So the darker circles are genomically tested animals. So they're using their genomic tested PLI, and the hollow ones are on parent average. So we're trying to make the best decisions as a group, as a whole. What I find pretty interesting about this graph is that, as you can see, the group of animals that are in between the two genomic tested batches, so just in that, just where the cursor is there, so they're very tight together. So the spread from the top to the bottom of them is quite close together. That's because they're on parent average, and they're maybe off of 10 bulls throughout the course of a year. So we would assume them to have 50% the similar genes. Whereas you can see when it moves to the genomic tested ones, especially the redder genomic tested ones to the right hand side, there becomes a bigger spread. So from that top to the bottom, there's a much wider spread. And that's just because we can know much more accurately what the results are and what the potential genetics are within that animal. And what we do is we've got so there's a line across the middle of them, So a bit like what William said, that the number of beef calves is becoming more, so we need to readdress this with him. But we sort of put in a lot of parameters on conception rate and, you know, like he said, how many straws they would get depending on days in milk and cull rate and the number of animals that you want to enter the milking herd. And we use that to create where that cut-off line is genetically, and make sure that we're breeding those better genetic animals and making sure that we're getting enough heifer calves, and we're also going to make as many beef calves and get that extra cash crop in there as possible. If you could just click on. And so this last graph is a bit like what Marco had. It's based on milk kilos. So it's based on the milk kilos along the bottom, and it's based on the animal's 305 mature equivalent. Again, the hollowed-in animals, there's just really the 10 to 15 that Marco had said had completed the lactation. So they're in there, and they're plotted alongside the parent average of the rest of the milking herd. And the reason I wanted to highlight this one was, as you can see, the trend line is obviously really positive. The higher milk animals give more milk, which is exactly what you'd expect. And that the genomic tested animals are a lot closer to that trend line. You can see the bulk of them are in and around that trend line compared to the spread being much higher with the parent average. And again, that just, for me, just highlights the accuracy of the genomic test. It highlights that how that can show that on farm and can really deliver that for William's genetic progress. It means that we can have full confidence in the results that's coming back and identify them earlier. We have even maybe potentially spoke about going forward if he's going to potentially breed more animals to the Jersey, that you can incorporate the genomic test in there, because you can then know as a young calf very early which of the animals are going to have higher fat and protein percent, and you have a much more accurate decision as to which animals you would crossbreed and which animals you would breed pure, to hopefully increase the percentages within the whole herd by doing it like that on a more accurate basis. And you just click on. And so just finally from me, it's just to highlight the current bulls that are in use, and to really highlight thankfully it's exactly what William said he was looking for, which doesn't always pan out that way. But as you can see there, the average of the 6 bulls that we're currently using is at 790 PLI, so really high PLI, roughly 700 kilos of milk with plus 0.15 fat percent and plus 0.1% protein. So for that volume of milk, it's verging on just about as high a percentages as you can get. So it's really ramping them up while still increasing the fertility index. So we're around about 9 for fertility, which is in the top 20-25 percentile of bulls available, with up over 126 days of lifespan. So like William said, we've really changed that focus in the last 18 months to make sure that we are addressing the percentages and really ramping that up, which will have a massive impact in the performance of his herd over the next number of years. And with that, I think that's me. I'll hand back to Sophie.
That's your final slide. Have you guys got any additional comments before we go to the summary? Willie, have you got any questions or thoughts?
No, I think they've summed up pretty much where we are at the moment, and where we're targeting to be, what we're aiming to do in the future. I've been really quite impressed with the genomic tests. As I say, we did some 2 years ago. It was something I'd thought about, but I had never had a lot of confidence in. So we decided we were going to try it, and when you see the results there, that the animals are doing pretty accurate, like what the genomic test said it would do. So it's certainly given me confidence in it, and that's why we've decided to go on and do more of them.
Yeah, can I just come in? There's a question came in, or a comment as much as anything. With genomic information available, would you not consider avoiding sex semen use on the bottom end heifers to speed up genetic gain?
Yes, I would now. When we looked at it the last time, and we looked at the genomic results, and that was then we then said, well, should we be putting some of these maiden heifers to beef semen? And we looked at it then and said, but the poorest maiden heifers were still genetically superior to most of the milking herd. But when you look at the figures that have come through this time, that's now not the case. That if you take the bottom 20% of the heifers, there are enough cows which are superior to them that we then now don't need to breed that. So that is something going forward now that I would think, going off these results, we will start putting the bottom end of the maiden heifers straight to beef.
Super. David, Marco, have you got any comments on that?
Well, I think, well, David can probably back it up from the data that he's looked at, but certainly we can see it in the, quite often, especially herds that are really starting to get to grips with genomic testing. They make quite rapid genetic progress, and you do find that the group of calves you're testing may be quite superior, and therefore there's not really a bottom quartile because you want to almost breed them all to beef. There may still be one or two. Typically there's a bit of selection potential. But once the herd's been genomically testing for a while, and actually then you see the milking herd is also starting to improve, that gap does narrow, and it does give you more selection opportunity in the maiden heifers to put some to beef, as Willie described.
Yeah, I think I agree with Marco. I think the key for me is that you look at the whole herd as a whole. A lot of people would have done maybe 40 genomic tests and maybe bred the bottom 10% of them as a rule of thumb to beef, whereas, like William said, the first batch, that wasn't particularly relevant because they were better. And so it's analysing that whole herd group and drawing a line somewhere there. We've got some herds where, you know, there can be a fourth calver that would qualify for dairy in there because genetically she's an outlier, which you then have the discussion at a farm level of genetics versus sort of reproduction, and you know how that's maybe sacrificed conception rates and that thing. But from a purely genetic point of view, yeah, you want to look at it as a whole herd and breed those better animals.
I think just to add to that, I think it also does highlight that genomics, it really is a management tool. And although it may look like quite a big upfront investment to genotype all of your calves, ultimately it is better to do it that way because it does give you the opportunity really to identify your top animals and your bottom animals. And sometimes, well, certainly in the early years, we saw farmers cherry picking to say, well, these probably are my 5 best calves and I'm going to genotype them to find out really how good they are. But just doing 5 or 10 calves on the herds doesn't give you enough information to make any different breeding decisions. It's interesting, but really, if you want to use it, you have to well, upfront invest in this to make sure that it gives you the best outcome really at the end of the day.
And you mentioned there about investment, Marco. David, is there what you have to consider cost? That was something that comes into it. Where does the cost come into your decisions?
You asked a year.
Was that
David? Yeah.
Me? Yeah, sorry. Yeah. So, but from my point of view, it's key to get that. It's all about the ranking the cows and doing it more accurately. From what the data that we've seen, if you can get a genomic test in and around the sort of, say 25 to 30 pounds bracket, that sort of region, that you will make 9 times out of 10, most customers will make a return on that investment. You see that the accuracy that gives and the genetic progress that you get off the back of that, you will make progress and more genetic progress off the back of that. I'd just like to say, sorry, from slightly before, what William did that was just brilliant is that he fully trusts the data now that comes back. And I think that's the key to the genomic testing. If you're going to be doing it as well, regardless of the cost, you have to trust the data that comes back. So if you've got a heifer calf out your favourite cow, and she comes back as not being below the beef cut-off line, if you're not willing to breed her to beef, then it's probably not worth your while genomic testing, because you have to, you have to trust that information comes back will be more accurate than parent average, and it will give you better guidance to the decisions that you're going to make.
Okay, thank you. We have another question here. I have genomically tested some older cows that have given 80 to 100 tonnes, calved regularly, no cases of mastitis, expecting to find genetic gold, but they don't have high PLI. It's tempting to breed from them. Any thoughts?
Well, I guess the first thing is we wouldn't recommend genotyping milking cows, just because at that point, although it's of interest, it doesn't really add much to you. It's unlikely you're going to really alter your breeding decisions based on that information. It's too late to color. You've already milked her, and certainly if you're going to genotype your best animals, you're not going to do anything different. So that's just one word of advice, I guess. Just don't spend money on genotyping milking cows. But given that you've done it, it's not unsurprising that the results aren't going to change dramatically. Unfortunately, and the main reason for that is genetic progress. So your herd will have moved on since those cows first came into the herd. If you had genotyped your whole herd, let's say 10 years ago, when maybe these cows were born, you would have expected these animals to be your superior amongst the peers at that time. But all the worst ones of that time have now left the herd, so you're left with the very best from that year of birth. So they are superior in the time that they were born, but given genetic progress, your new crop of animals you expect to be superior. And I guess that's just where genetics does come through. And ultimately, our advice would be not to breed from them. There may be some sentimental value that you want to do it, but your genetics will have moved on. You would expect their progeny to be superior if you use the right bulls, and really do focus on the animals that can make that genetic progress in your herd.
Yeah, Willie, what thoughts?
I was going to add to that, if I may, that what Marco touched on there is what I would normally say in response to that is that, like, William could have a late lactation third calver who's got a granddaughter that's about to be bred in the heifer pens. If he's used sex semen and they've both calved, at 2 years old in their first lactation. So if you've made that genetic progress and you've used better bulls each time, then her granddaughter and maybe even great granddaughter should be better genetically. If you were to genomic test them, then they should be higher. And there's no reason why they wouldn't then have the genetics to be able to do the same performance that she has.
Okay. William, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I would go with that we now breed very few older cows to dairy. Just go with the theory that we're trying to make genetic progress. So yes, we've got cows that might have done 80 or 90 or 100 tons of milk, but we're hoping that the generations that have come on since then are so much better, and that those these younger animals will go on and do that in the future, and possibly have either give slightly more milk or have more milk quality, or maybe give a little bit less bother getting back in calve. Or so yeah, we go with the fact that we're using genetics to make progress. So we're just accepting that these younger animals are going to be better than the ones we bred 4 or 5 or 6 years ago.
So it's coming back to believing in the data, isn't it, as well? Another question, a little bit, it's more of a comments, please. Les Hansen says genomic sires are increasing inbreeding rapidly in the Holstein breed. What's comment on that, Marco?
Well, certainly in the UK, we track inbreeding and we can see it tracking up. But actually in the UK, when we look at the female level, which is probably more interesting than the bull level, because ultimately we're milking cows, and that's where we want to manage the inbreeding. What we do see is that it's tracking up, but it's not tracking up more rapidly than it was prior to genomics. And we were similarly concerned. We were thinking, well, everybody's going to jump on these high genomic sires, but actually there seems to be enough genetic variation that we can manage it. And I think one of the reasons why we're managing it is because a lot of farmers are recognizing that utilizing the tools that David is describing that we use here, using the mating programs that are out there, we can manage genetic gain as well as inbreeding at the same time. So it's manageable. I think we're aware of it. We monitor it, and again, as part of our genetics advisory forum that I discussed earlier, where we look at PLIs and SCI and ACI's construction, we also monitor inbreeding just to make sure that we're not getting to levels that are dangerous. I know it's a growing topic of discussion, but we do believe that with the right tools you can manage it.
William, have you got any comments on that? Or
I think that's a bit above my level. I'm putting faith in the programme to sort it out and manage it to stop it happening on farm level. So I think what's happening with breeding bulls is a bit above me.
Here is one for you then. When do you get a return from investment though? Can they explain when you start recouping the cost of the initial outlay? Is it in 12 months when you sell beef calves and would need to sell a lot of beef calves, or when the cows are in the herd milking in 3 years' time? I see it as a slow return on investment at the moment.
I don't think there's a lot of fast returns on investment in farming. I think one of the things that struck me the last time was the change in those matings and those maiden heifers, and mating them better to improve the quality of their offspring. Which, yes, it's another generation down the line before you're seeing the return, but it becomes the same as a lot of things. It's, yeah, you maybe need to invest for a year or two before you really start recouping it. You're not going to recoup it straight away. There is a bit if you're not breeding from poorer end animals, but yeah, I do accept that it's a long-term commitment, I would say. I know one of the decisions that we've made, it might not be, everybody might not agree, but we've decided to stop pedigree register and doing type classification. And I feel that the Genomics is a better investment than that. It doesn't cover all the cost of it, but it probably covers about half the cost of it. Everybody might not agree with that, but that's the kind of view that I've taken, that we're finding, we're not really breeding animals to sell. We just want to breed enough replacements for our own herd. And I've got enough confidence in that data coming through to use that for my breeding decisions, that so we're doing that to offset the price a little.
The other thing, maybe just to comment on that question, is so it is true that there isn't a quick win. It is a long-term investment, but if you've got surplus of young stock and well, you've got the ability to cull some of your bottom animals out, I think then there is an immediate saving that can be made. Because if you stop rearing 1 or 2 heifers, well, that's 1,800, 3,500 pounds over a 2-year period. That's an investment you can quite quickly recoup. So there is some potential, but it's yeah, you got to make use of the data. You got to trust the data to make those decisions.
And all the data shows that genetically, when the genomic test comes back, the higher milk animals will 99 times out of 100 give more milk, and the higher fertility ones will get in calf quicker, and like we showed earlier, the higher fat and protein ones will give more fat and protein. So if you've got specific breeding goals like that, and like William, if you're moving, depending on what your milk contract is, if you can identify them earlier, and like Marco said, either sell them or breed them to beef earlier, then that does mean it will take time. It means that your herd genetic level will rise a lot quicker for what those traits are that are important to you and to your milk contract.
Okay, lovely. We're going to have one more question here. Is the use of embryo transfer combined with genomic testing a way to improve the overall genetic value of the herd faster?
I think, well, obviously, the more selection pressure we can apply, the more rapid we can progress. So yeah, definitely, if we say, well, instead of breeding the top 50%, as is the case in this herd, or the top 25% to sexed, and we say, well, we're only really going to pick our top 5 or 10 heifers, and that's the ones we're going to multiply up. There is potential to make more genetic progress, but there's also a cost to it. And I think some of the cost for embryo transfer is probably more debatable than the discussion we just had on the cost of genomic testing. So it's very herd dependent. You need to have quite a lot of variance to be able to say, well, I really want to multiply up my top end. So it's not something we currently recommend, but it is another tool just to make faster genetic progress for sure. Yeah.
Okay, lovely. Slightly off topic, William, there is a question here for you, just asking about how's your calf hutches doing?
No, calf hutches are doing very well. We're very pleased with the calf hutches. The calves are doing well on them. We had a little bit of problems with some scour on the back end, but that was just down to they were under a bit of pressure with so many calves that we weren't getting them. We've now a lot more focus on making sure they all get cleaned and disinfected between each calf, and that seems to have sorted that out. So they are labour intensive, but I feel for the performance and health of the calf, I think they're hard to beat.
Okay, and I'm seeing another last question here, Willie. What's your herd replacement rate?
We are running in around the 20% at the moment. We were slightly below it maybe a year or so ago, and we're increasing cow numbers, so we've got numbers up a bit. So we've got surplus heifers now, so we're probably looking to cull some of the kind of bottom end more out. And but that's our target's about 20%.
Lovely, thank you. And I'm not going to ask any more questions. That's everything that I can see from there. So I'm going to hand back to Sophie to wrap it up. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, guys. Marco, there's a couple more things here. I think you were just wanting to finish on. Apologies for my microphone cutting in and out, but I'll just start sharing. Here we go.
Yeah. Okay, so I guess it's just one summary slide just to wrap up, I guess, the discussion we've had during the presentation. So first of all, we started off with discussing really to think about your own breeding program, and your own herd is different to your neighbor's herd, and etc. So really do think about where you want to go, what areas you want to address in terms of breeding, because once you've made that decision, your following steps become a lot easier. We've talked about the AHDB herd genetic report. So if you're milk recording, it's a report that's available for free. Just drop us an email or give us a call, and we can set you up and give you access to that tool that we've talked through. Then consider if Genomics can help you reach your goal faster. So it is as also we outlined in the discussion earlier, it's a management tool. You've got to trust the data. Go into it with a plan. Don't just start dabbling with it and then decide what you're going to do with it, but make that decision beforehand. And then Genomics can help you to reach your goal faster. So if you've got surplus young stock, you can cull some. We talked about maximizing potential of your best genetics and optimizing revenue from using more beef steven at the bottom end. And both of those can really help you to progress and ultimately give you a return on that investment. And then the final piece of the puzzle is also making sure that you pick the best bulls. You should be in control. For sure, take advice and breeding advices that can help you make the decision, but ultimately you've got to come to the table with your plan of what you want to achieve, and then your breeding advisor can really help you to pick those bulls, because it's imperative that you get the right bulls in the tank to make genetic progress. So fairly simple steps really to make sure that whatever decisions you're going to make for the future are suitable for your needs. But do take time to think about it, and do take control. Don't just outsource it to experts in the field to deliver it for you. I think there's plenty of information you can look into to make control. And I think my next slide, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, okay, so that's just a slide reference to the website where you can find further information. So that's the AHDB breeding and genetics pages. So on there we've got all the links to the herd genetic report on the right hand side, that square. Also all the bull list on PLI, SCI and ACI I've talked about. We've also got a set of tutorial videos on the left hand side there. You can see 4 videos that are 5-minute tutorial videos to help you understand the various genetic indexes we've got available, understanding these profit indexes, so PLI, SCI, ACI, how to use your herd genetic report, and how to select sires and dams. So all of those are about 5 minutes each, and they are useful reminders or tutorials if you're new to this area. And then the final one is there's a lot of information there on fact sheets. So again, on that home page, if you scroll down, you'll find a set of fact sheets that go into a little bit more detail on the individual indexes that we've got available for the industry. So do make some time to have a quick look at it and remind you what's available before you make your next semen decision, and hopefully that will help you breed a better herd.
Thank you very much, everyone. Marco, David, thank you for your input today, and William, as always, thank you very much for your honesty. And thank you for the questions from everyone. I hope you have enjoyed and learnt something today. So, Willie, going forward, will you genomic test my heifers for your next batch?
Yeah, I think going forward, we're looking into genomic testing all our calves now.
Thank you. It's been great to hear from you all. David, thank you very much for coming from the commercial side, and Marco, thanks for updating us on everything we're doing. Take care, everyone.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.
Bye.